The day Spain declared war on sandcastles. Spain is famous for many things: sun-drenched beaches, tapas that turn lunch into a lifestyle, and an entire national identity built on celebrating everything from tomatoes to flamenco to the simple art of existing beautifully. But nestled among Spain's cultural treasures sits one of the most eyebrow-raising rules ever crafted by municipal imagination: the local bans on building sandcastles. That's right. Of all the things that could draw a fine in Spain, from unruly scooters to loud fiestas past midnight, the humble sandcastle somehow ended up on the list. And not just in the "please don't build a palace that blocks the walkway" kind of way, but in actual enforceable regulations designed to protect beaches, peace, and apparently the emotional well-being of adults who are terrified of stepping on a sandy turret. What makes this law so captivating is how spectacularly un-Spanish it feels. Spain is not exactly known for its devotion to rules as much as its love of life. This is the land where meals last 5 hours, where festivals involve running with bulls or covering entire towns in wine, and where even the siesta is treated like a constitutional right. And yet, on certain beaches, a bucket and shovel can technically make you a criminal mastermind. The contradiction is irresistible, and like any good mystery, it begs to be told from the beginning. Because this story doesn't start with Spain waking up one morning and deciding to outlaw joy. It starts with a quieter, more practical question. How many sandcastles does it take to ruin a beach? And not just any beach. Spain's beaches, which are among the busiest, most visited, and most environmentally fragile in all of Europe. When millions of sunbathers descend every year, the pressure on the coastline becomes more intense than a flamenco performance at midnight. And eventually, even innocent pastimes like sculpting towers of damp sand start to turn into unexpected problems. The sandcastle ban didn't emerge from some villainous anti-child manifesto, nor did it arise because a bureaucrat felt personally threatened by a moat. In reality, the origins of the ban lie in an intricate web of environmental preservation laws, municipal safety concerns, and the eternal, unresolvable battle between beachgoers and city councils. Across various Spanish coastal regions, particularly high-traffic tourist destinations, local governments noticed that sandcastle construction had quietly escalated from a childish pastime into something closer to terraforming. Visitors were no longer satisfied with a modest mound and a twig flag. No, the 21st century beach architect arrived with ambition. They built fortress complexes with winding canals. They sculpted dragons the size of minivans. They carved entire mythical kingdoms that spanned several sunbeds. And these adorable sandy metropolises created chaos. City workers complained that elaborate constructions blocked beach cleaning tractors at dawn. Lifeguards insisted that people tripped over moats left unfilled, twisting ankles, spraining egos, and filing complaints. Beach erosion studies warned that large pits, trenches and excavations, often dug to anchor elaborate castle foundations, were altering the coastline in subtle but cumulative ways. And worst of all, toddlers kept falling into these pits like unsuspecting Indiana Jones explorers, requiring parents to perform dramatic sand rescues before snack time. But the pivotal moment in the story came when Spanish municipalities realized that once you let one group build a small castle, the next group arrives determined to build Valencia Cathedral with built-in drainage systems. And then, as is always the case with humanity, competition spiraled. People started organizing unofficial sandcastle contests. Tourists declared sandy land claims like miniature conquistadors. Beach territory became a political battlefield of sun umbrellas and sand shovels. Local councils had seen enough. They decided it was time to step in, not to crush creativity, but to prevent the beaches from turning into sandy construction zones that looked like someone had tried to build a medieval city and then abandoned it halfway. Enter the municipal bylaws. Unlike dramatic national legislation, these rules crept quietly into existence at the city level. One coastal community added a rule first, then another. Over time, a patchwork quilt of sandcastle restrictions emerged across Spain. In some places, the rule was simple. No digging holes deeper than knee height. In others, castle size was capped at modest proportions, as if the beach had suddenly adopted its own urban zoning plan. And in a few particularly overburdened tourist hotspots, the law was blunt. No construction of sandcastles whatsoever unless part of an approved organised competition. This is where the myth and the truth began to fuse. While the laws were localised, limited and rooted in environmental management, international media couldn't resist turning it into a sensational headline. Spain bans sandcastles. Dramatic, ridiculous, impossible to ignore. And like all great viral exaggerations, it sprinted across the internet faster than a tourist running to reserve a sunbed at sunrise. Soon, people worldwide believed that Spain had declared a nationwide war against childhood happiness. Travel blogs warned visitors to beware of building anything on the beach. Vacationers nervously asked if their children would be fined for making a tiny sand turtle. Meanwhile, Spaniards themselves blinked at the headlines in confusion, wondering how their local council's mundane rule about beach maintenance had turned into a global scandal. But the truth was far more nuanced than the sensational versions. These laws were not universal across Spain, nor were they enforced with the zeal of a medieval inquisition. In fact, most locals would laugh if you asked them whether it's truly illegal to build a sandcastle. Because unless you're digging a trench deep enough to hide a horse, or constructing a replica of the Alhambra that blocks the fire access path, nobody cares what you and your bucket are doing. Still, the myth endured. People love a strange law, especially one that pits innocence against bureaucracy. And the idea of a little child carefully building a sand castle while a stern lifeguard approaches with a ticket book is irresistibly absurd. It became a perfect comedic image. Spain, the land of fiestas and sunshine, cracking down on plastic shovels. But beneath the humour lies a much deeper truth about Spain's beaches. These shorelines are precious, fragile ecosystems. They shift, erode, shrink, regrow and breathe with the tides. Every pit, mound and trench carved by human hands affects the natural choreography of sand, water and wind. And with millions of visitors per year, small disruptions add up. Because of this, Spanish municipalities began to take coastal protection more seriously. That's where the sandcastle bans fit in, not as anti-fun edicts, but as micro-regulations within a larger effort to preserve shorelines. Environmental experts argued that even minor disturbances can influence dune formation, water drainage patterns and wildlife habitats. Sea turtles, for example, rely on undisturbed sand for nesting in other parts of the world. While not a major issue in most of Spain, the logic remained. Beaches deserve respect, especially those under immense tourism pressure. So, in a twist worthy of a documentary plot, the sandcastle debate became a reflection of Spain's long-standing tension between protecting its natural beauty and accommodating its visitor economy. Tourism is one of the country's largest industries, but beaches cannot survive unlimited interference. Somewhere between these realities, the sandcastle rules emerged. Quirky, sometimes strict, sometimes lenient, always misunderstood. Of course, the irony of adults being told not to build castles hasn't been lost on anyone. Tourists joke about planning illegal sandcastle heists. Children giggle at the idea that their innocent forts could be considered contraband. And social media influencers stage dramatic videos showing themselves tapping a bucket into the sand while whispering, "Don't tell the Spanish police." Yet, despite the jokes, the laws continue to serve their purpose. They protect beachgoers from injuries. They keep cleaning tractors from getting stuck in trenches. They preserve the landscape in ways most visitors never notice. And even though the laws are highly local rather than national, their reputation has grown into a legend. In many ways, the story of Spain's sandcastle restrictions is not about banning fun, but managing a coastline loved by millions. It's about preventing chaos, avoiding injury, respecting nature, and sometimes gently reminding tourists that the beach is not a blank canvas for large-scale excavation projects. It is shared land, a space for everyone. But no matter how sensible the logic behind the rule may be, it will forever live in the global imagination as the country that outlawed sandcastles. It has secured a place among the world's funniest legal anecdotes, not because it is truly absurd, but because humanity loves to laugh at the collision of childhood innocence with adult overregulation. Spain didn't set out to outlaw fun. It set out to protect a coastline. But the story took on a life of its own, as legends always do. And now the tale of the forbidden sandcastle has become part of Spain's cultural tapestry. Beloved, debated, exaggerated, and above all, unforgettable. How Spain accidentally turned sand into a bureaucratic battlefield. When you look at a beach, any beach, you see serenity. Waves rolling, sun glimmering. The soft hush of people relaxing into the ancient rhythm of sea meets shore. What you usually don't see is the invisible war between municipalities, tourists, environmentalists, lifeguards, cleanliness crews, and the stubborn unpredictability of nature itself. But beneath every grain of sand in Spain lies a story of conflict. Not dramatic conflict, mind you. No swords or rebellions or political uprisings. Instead, it is a quieter struggle. People simply trying to enjoy the beach without accidentally destroying it. The irony of the sandcastle laws in Spain is that sandcastles themselves are innocent. They are nostalgic and universal, harmless in concept, almost sacred in childhood memory. But the moment you place these soft, delightful structures on the hyper-popular beaches of Spain, beaches overflowing with millions upon millions of tourists, you suddenly discover that innocence doesn't scale well. It's cute when 5 kids build a castle. It's a problem when 5,000 do. By the early 21st century, Spanish coastal cities had already been grappling with beach crowding for decades. As tourism skyrocketed, particularly in regions like Valencia, Catalonia, Andalusia, and the Balearic Islands, municipalities found themselves performing a yearly dance with the forces of erosion, trash, traffic, and overcrowding. The beaches were becoming victims of their own popularity. And within that environment, even the smallest behaviours became magnified. In this landscape of mounting pressure, the humble sandcastle evolved from a childhood pastime into a logistical challenge. Some tourists built modest little structures. Others took it as a competitive sport. And then there were those who approached the task with the intensity of Renaissance architects, constructing elaborate fortresses, sprawling complexes, canals with flowing water systems, and pits that could have doubled as foxholes in wartime trenches. To understand why Spanish officials started questioning the role of sandcastles, you have to picture the beaches at the height of summer. The coastline appears less like a natural landscape and more like a lively, chaotic human habitat. Towels overlap like a patchwork quilt. Umbrellas rise like a forest of multicoloured mushrooms. People walk, run, nap, eat, sunbathe, play volleyball, build sand sculptures, dig holes, bury each other, and generally re-engineer the terrain with their collective footprints. Every day, the beach changes shape, a living organism moulded by human hands. Municipal cleaning crews, responsible for restoring order each night, found themselves navigating a labyrinth. Sandcastles blocked tractor routes. Deep pits created hazards for machinery. Long trenches, carved out for water channels, interrupted natural drainage. And sometimes abandoned sand fortresses hardened in the sun, turning into archaeological structures that required serious effort to dismantle. Each morning brought a new wave of obstacles. Lifeguards reported their own issues. People tripping into moats, joggers twisting ankles, small children disappearing into sudden, unexpected cavities in the sand, like cartoon characters falling through trapdoors. On especially busy days, the landscape of amateur excavation became so chaotic that visibility lines, crucial for lifeguards, were disrupted by large sand structures. Environmental officials contributed additional concerns. Some beaches bordered delicate dune systems. Others were studied for erosion patterns. When tourists dug trenches and large holes, they unintentionally altered the shoreline's natural processes. Even minor disruptions multiplied when repeated thousands of times over a season. Within this stew of practical headaches, the idea of regulating sandcastle building no longer seemed humorous to officials. It became a question of safety, sustainability, and the basic possibility of managing beaches that sometimes hosted more visitors than the towns themselves had residents. The laws that emerged were not sweeping national edicts. Instead, they appeared quietly through local ordinances. A city would pass a rule limiting the size of sand structures. Another town would restrict digging holes deeper than a certain measurement. Some councils added broader environmental protections that implicitly included sandcastle construction. And a few, particularly those hit hardest by overcrowding, decided to prohibit sandcastle building altogether unless done as part of an organized event. The truth is, Spain's municipalities were not trying to outlaw fun. They were simply trying to control a growing phenomenon before it turned into larger problems. But once the rules existed, even in limited form, the world did what it always does. It exaggerated them into legend. International newspapers seized the story. Spain bans sandcastles became an irresistible headline. It didn't matter that the rules were only in certain towns. It didn't matter that they were rarely enforced harshly. The world now had a new, quirky law to talk about, and it fit neatly alongside other famous oddities. No racing horses on highways, no walking your chicken without a leash, no eating fried chicken with utensils. The more absurd the idea, the faster it spread. What made the Spanish sandcastle myth particularly powerful is that it seemed to contradict everything people knew about Spain. How could the country of fiestas, siestas, open expressions of joy, and some of the most relaxed beach cultures in Europe possibly find itself tangled in regulations about something as innocent as sand play? The contradiction created comedic gold. Yet beneath the jokes, the truth continued quietly. The beaches still needed protecting. The tourists still came in overwhelming numbers. and Spanish officials still face the complicated task of preserving natural beauty in the face of relentless demand. The social reactions within Spain were mixed and often humorous. Many locals shrugged and said the rule was common sense. Some joked that if the government really wanted to enforce it, they'd need squads of castle police patrolling the shores. Others mocked the foreign media for turning a small municipal rule into a global scandal. But even then, most people understood the real reason behind the legislation. The beaches were changing, and something had to be done. Meanwhile, tourists reacted with a combination of confusion, fascination, and misinterpretation. Some asked lifeguards if their children could safely build a small castle. Others worried that the police would fine them for using a shovel. Some internet users embraced the myth wholeheartedly, believing it to be a nationwide law enforced with great severity. The more absurd the rumor became, the more traction it gained, because absurdity always travels faster than nuance. The legend grew stronger each year, reinforced by travel blogs, social media, and humorous travel guides. The sandcastle rule became a symbol, not of oppression or strictness, but of the quirky ways modern tourism intersects with traditionally relaxed cultures. People began to treat the idea of a banned sandcastle as a kind of comedic shorthand for over-tourism, environmental strain, and the eternal tension between freedom and order on popular beaches. Yet, for all the jokes, the ban continued to serve its quiet purpose. It reminded visitors to treat beaches with respect, to avoid excessively altering the landscape, and to remember that the coastline is a shared, fragile space. So, while many people think of Spain's sandcastle laws as humorous oddities, they remain deeply connected to the real challenges facing the country's coastal regions. Sandcastle building became a symbol, not because the law is outrageous, but because it captures a universal truth. When too many people enjoy a place without regard for its limits, the place suffers. Spain's beaches will always be magnets for visitors seeking beauty, relaxation, and the simple pleasure of moulding damp sand between their fingers. But beneath the gentle waves lies the constant pressure of preserving these beloved coastlines for future generations. The sandcastle laws, strange as they may appear, are tiny threads in a much larger tapestry of environmental stewardship. And as the legend continues to spread, people keep talking about Spain's forbidden castles, while the real story remains buried beneath layers of comedy, tourism, and exaggeration. It is a story of balance between nature and humanity, between enjoyment and protection, between tradition and modern necessity. In the end, the sandcastle laws capture something profoundly human. We build castles because we can, because it feels good, because it connects us to childhood. And Spain regulates them not to crush that joy, but to ensure that the shoreline remains a place where joy is possible at all. The law, however strange it may seem at first glance, is simply a reflection of a truth that every beachgoer eventually learns. The sand belongs to everyone, and it must be cared for. How tourists turned a simple rule into an international comedy. The curious thing about rules, especially beach rules, is that they rarely stay simple once tourists get involved. You can put up a modest sign saying, "Don't dig deep holes," and almost instantly the universe responds with someone digging a hole big enough to hide a mid-size family car. You warn people not to leave trash behind, and that very afternoon you'll find someone attempting to grill a full seafood paella on the sand using driftwood and questionable optimism. Spanish beaches, being among the most visited in the world, are particularly fertile ground for these sorts of misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and downright misadventures. And so, when certain municipalities quietly introduced regulations related to sandcastle building, they unintentionally sparked an international wave of confusion that would ripple outward for years. The rules weren't dramatic. They weren't harsh. They weren't even unusual by the standards of heavily visited beaches. But something about the phrase "Spain bans sandcastles" resonated in a way no one expected. The origin of this global misunderstanding can be traced back to a handful of tourists who encountered these local regulations and reacted with the bewilderment of explorers stumbling upon mysterious ancient artifacts. They took photos of the rules. They posted them online. They added personal commentary, some accurate, some exaggerated, some delivered with the comedic flourish of someone who couldn't quite believe what they were reading. And because humour thrives on the internet, like algae in summer heat, the story spread. People encountered the claims on travel blogs, meme pages, and social media threads, and responded in predictable patterns. Some laughed, some were outraged. Some believed wholeheartedly that Spain had enacted a nationwide ban enforced by stern officers patrolling the sand with measuring tape. The more the story circulated, the more dramatic it became, each retelling adding layers of absurdity until the original context was buried under digital sediment, much like a forgotten sandcastle, eventually reclaimed by the tide. One traveller insisted online that she watched a Spanish police officer dismantle a child's sandcastle with the solemnity of someone performing an official duty. Another claimed that families were fined hundreds of euros for digging trenches. Yet another swore that only licensed events were allowed to build anything with sand, as if the beach required the bureaucracy of an international airport. These stories spread not because they were true, but because they were entertaining. And entertainment doesn't need accuracy. It only needs an audience. The Spanish people watched these international interpretations with a mixture of amusement, confusion, and occasional exasperation. Every summer, new waves of tourists would arrive with questions that ranged from polite curiosity to outright disbelief. Is it true we can't build sandcastles? Is there a size limit? Do we need a permit? Will we get fined if we use a bucket? Some asked nervously. Others asked excitedly, hoping the rule was real because it added a sprinkling of drama to their holiday. Local officials found themselves in the strange position of patiently explaining a rule that was never as dramatic as the myth suggested. Lifeguards tasked with ensuring beach safety often became unofficial ambassadors of common sense. They'd reassure parents that small sandcastles were perfectly fine. They'd gently remind enthusiastic adult builders not to create structures large enough to topple onto passers-by. They'd point out that digging massive holes could be dangerous, particularly near the waterline, where collapsing sand could trap or injure someone. Cleaning crews, on the other hand, weren't concerned with myths or tourist gossip. They just wanted clear paths for their nightly rounds. For them, the sandcastle rule was less about drama and more about practical necessity. But as the internet continued weaving exaggerated tales, even the modest, practical intention behind the rule was lost in a blur of global misunderstanding. The beaches themselves evolved into unexpected stages for this ongoing confusion. On any given summer day, you might witness a tourist couple whispering conspiratorially while building a small mound, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting armed guards to burst through the sea foam. Nearby, another family would be carving an elaborate dragon with complete confidence, blissfully unaware that anyone believed such creations could be forbidden. Occasionally, you'd find someone trying to test the limits of the supposed law. One group of teenagers decided to build the smallest possible sandcastle, just a tiny bump, barely taller than a seashell, and then took photos posing dramatically as if they had committed an act of rebellion. Conversely, another group attempted to build the biggest sandcastle they could manage, insisting they were proving a point, even though no one had asked for such proof. Humans, it seems, are deeply motivated by rules. They either want to follow them perfectly, or they want to break them creatively. And nothing sparks this instinct more than a rule that seems mildly ridiculous. Naturally, the media amplified the spectacle. Travel magazines ran humorous articles. Online videos appeared with titles like, "We tried to build a sandcastle in Spain, and here's what happened." The law became a comedic talking point in travel documentaries, podcasts, and late-night shows. The myth grew so persistent that even some Spanish locals began joking about it, despite knowing full well how small and localized the actual regulations were. But beneath all the comedy, something more subtle was happening. The myth, this exaggerated story of tiny castles forbidden by a whimsical government, highlighted a deeper tension shared by many of the world's most popular tourist destinations. The struggle between preserving a place and accommodating the millions who want to enjoy it. Spain's beaches were not alone in facing this challenge. All around the world, coastal regions were grappling with overcrowding, erosion, pollution, and the pressures of mass tourism. From Italy's Cinque Terre to Brazil's Ipanema, from the beaches of Thailand to the shores of California, the same story was unfolding. Too many people, too little space, and too fragile a natural landscape to keep absorbing the impact. In that broader context, Spain's sandcastle regulations no longer looked like oddities. They looked like early attempts at finding balance. The beaches weren't being protected because Spain disliked sandcastles. They were being protected because sand is both precious and vulnerable. When millions of feet walk across it, dig into it, move it around, and disrupt its natural patterns, the effects accumulate. Erosion accelerates, dunes weaken, shorelines shift. And so a rule that seemed trivial at first glance actually carried quiet significance. It stood as a reminder that even joyful, harmless activities can have unintended consequences when multiplied by the sheer scale of modern tourism. Still, no matter how logical the rule was in context, tourists continued to treat the idea of a sandcastle ban as an irresistible joke. People who would never read a municipal ordinance in their hometowns suddenly became passionate scholars of Spanish beach law. Over-analysis of the rule flooded online discussion boards. Some speculated about loopholes, others debated whether drip castles counted as structures. Someone asked if moats were technically allowed if connected to a larger sand formation. Human creativity knows no limits, especially when rules are involved. Meanwhile, Spanish celebrities, comedians and influencers embraced the absurdity. Jokes proliferated. Mock sandcastle police videos circulated. Satirical memes portrayed dramatic standoffs between toddlers and imaginary officers wielding tiny shovels. The myth became a kind of cultural in-joke, one that both locals and tourists could laugh about together. But there is one detail people often overlook. Myths, even humorous ones, can shape real behavior. The fear of breaking a law, even a non-existent or exaggerated one, can change how people act. Some families genuinely refrained from building anything in the sand, believing it was forbidden. Others built structures carefully and discreetly, trying to avoid trouble. And a small number embraced the myth so wholeheartedly that they started policing other tourists, telling them to stop building castles because it was illegal, unaware that they themselves were now spreading misinformation. Yet, as much as the myth distorted reality, it also created conversations that might not have happened otherwise. People who had never considered the environmental impact of their beach activities suddenly found themselves discussing erosion, safety hazards, and overcrowding. Travellers who usually glossed over local regulations began paying closer attention. Even if the sandcastle myth wasn't accurate, it prompted people to think, and thinking is often the first step toward respecting a place. So, the story of Spain's sandcastle law is not just about humour, confusion, or exaggerated headlines. It is also about how small realities can grow into large legends, and how legends can influence behaviour in surprising ways. It is about the unpredictable interactions between culture, tourism, digital communication, and environmental preservation. But most importantly, it is about the delicate dance playing out on Spain's beloved coastlines, where millions of visitors seek joy, relaxation, and connection with nature, while the land itself strains under the weight of that attention. The sandcastle myth is a tiny, whimsical expression of that bigger, more complex relationship. The beaches will always draw people because they offer something timeless. The pull of the sea is ancient, primal, and deeply emotional. Sandcastles are not just structures, they are symbols of moments. Moments of play, imagination, and temporary beauty destined to be reclaimed by the waves. And perhaps that is why the idea of banning them feels so shocking to people. It seems like banning joy itself. But Spain never wanted to ban joy. It only wanted to protect the fragile settings where joy thrives. The myth may have grown larger than reality, but its existence reflects the importance of caring for places we love. Whether the sandcastle rule is misunderstood or exaggerated, the beaches themselves remain very real, and they need stewardship more than ever. As tourists continue coming and going, as stories continue circulating, as myths continue evolving, the shoreline remains the silent witness to every misunderstanding, every joke, every cautious builder nervously patting down a turret while glancing over their shoulder. And when the tide rolls in each evening, it smooths the sand clean again, effortlessly, gracefully, without judgment. Whatever castles were built, whatever stories were told, whatever myths were believed, the ocean resets the world for the next day, ready to begin again. How enforcement became an accidental spectacle of summer. There is a universal truth about rules at the beach. No matter how straightforward they are, someone, somewhere, will misinterpret them in spectacular fashion. Spain's municipal regulations regarding sand structures were simple enough in writing, practical, reasonable, and rooted in specific local needs. But once placed into the real world of sunburnt travellers, multilingual confusion and beachside enthusiasm, they became something else entirely. They became a show. The enforcement of these rules, especially during the early years after their quiet implementation, unintentionally turned into one of the most subtle yet oddly entertaining dynamics along the Spanish coast. It wasn't a spectacle created intentionally. No one designed it to be a show. It simply happened because humans and rules, when put together in a leisurely environment, tend to generate comedy. Take, for instance, the beach patrols. These were not stern, militaristic enforcers marching through the sand with the gravity of courtroom judges. They were typically municipal workers, lifeguards, or local police officers in light uniforms, wearing sunglasses, sandals, and the relaxed expression of someone who spends their days surrounded by sunshine and sea air. Their primary responsibilities involved safety, order, and crowd management, not hunting rogue architects of sand. But because the myth grew faster than the reality, tourists began imagining these patrols as a specialized anti-sandcastle unit. When officers walked by, people whispered, children stared, adults exchanged nervous glances or paused in mid-bucket pour, frozen like ancient statues, waiting to see if they were breaking a law. The officers, unaware of the melodrama unfolding around them, usually just nodded politely and kept walking. The confusion would become even more amusing when officers actually did intervene. The interventions were not dramatic. No whistles, no shouting, no confiscation of plastic shovels. It was usually a gentle conversation. Hey, just be careful with the size, or try not to block the path, or don't dig so close to the waterline, it collapses. These instructions were delivered calmly, even cheerfully. Yet the tourists on the receiving end often reacted as if they had just been issued a formal citation in the Supreme Court of Sand. Families would apologize profusely. Children looked guilty. Some tourists even recorded the interaction, convinced they had witnessed the enforcement of a legendary Spanish law. Others went online later and posted dramatic recountings that had very little in common with what actually happened. Their stories described officers shutting down giant sand structures or fines being handed out left and right, when in reality the interaction had been nothing more than a friendly reminder delivered with the energy of a neighbour telling you that your garden hose is leaking. And because the myth of Spain banning sandcastles had already reached global proportions, these exaggerated retellings only fed the phenomenon. Meanwhile, locals who lived near these beaches found themselves unintentionally cast as supporting actors in this comedic production. Many of them understood the rules perfectly well. They knew what was allowed, what was discouraged, and why it mattered. So when tourists panicked or asked dramatic questions, locals often responded with the patient amusement of people who had seen the same misunderstanding repeated dozens of times every summer. Some embraced the confusion with a sense of humour. They joked back. They teased gently. A few even added playful fuel to the myth. Imagine a local grandfather sitting under an umbrella, sipping a cold drink, and telling a wide-eyed tourist that the legendary Sandcastle police had been patrolling since 1998, with a strict policy against structures exceeding the height of a beach umbrella. All said with a completely straight face. Then, moments later, he would chuckle to himself as the tourist hurried off to warn their family. Others attempted to correct the misinformation with genuine care. They explained the real reasoning behind the rules. They emphasized environmental concerns, safety hazards, and the need for clear pathways for clean-up crews. But even then, the tourists listened with a slight sense of disbelief, as though the locals were part of an elaborate cover-up protecting some secret sandcastle conspiracy. One of the funniest unintended consequences of the growing myth was the increasing number of tourists who approached beach authorities, and this happened more often than one might imagine, to ask for official permission to build a sandcastle. They would approach an officer shyly and say things like, "Excuse me, is it okay if we build a small one? Or do we need a permit for this? Or how high are we allowed to build?" Officers who were accustomed to questions about safety flags and jellyfish sightings suddenly found themselves navigating architectural inquiries. Some even started giving unofficial guidelines just to avoid confusing anyone further. A lifeguard might say, "Just don't build it too close to the walkway." A municipal worker might say, "Keep it small enough that the cleaning tractors can pass." These were not rules written in any law. They were simply practical advice, but tourists treated these words like sacred beach decrees. Meanwhile, the enforcement of actual sand-related hazards, such as deep pits that could collapse or giant mounds blocking emergency vehicles, was overshadowed in the public imagination by the much more humorous image of officers dismantling turrets. In reality, when officers intervened in these hazardous cases, it was almost always a matter of safety, not legality. The goal was to prevent accidents, and in many cases, that intervention likely prevented injuries. But the Internet thrives not on dull practicality, but on delightfully absurd exaggeration. And so the myth persisted. As the myth grew, towns across Spain began noticing how often their local regulations were being misunderstood. Some municipalities updated their signage to be clearer. Others issued public clarifications on their websites. A few even used humour, adding small icons or playful language to make the rules easier for tourists to understand. But no matter how clear the signage became, the meme-like nature of the sandcastle myth kept circulating in global culture like a stubborn rumour. Tourists continued arriving with questions, and locals continued answering them with the good-natured patience of people accustomed to summer confusion. The dynamic became so predictable that many coastal residents considered it part of the rhythm of tourist season. There were the usual summer patterns: the first hot weekend, the rush of beachgoers, the jellyfish warnings, the evening fireworks, and of course the first tourist nervously asking whether they were allowed to build a sandcastle. Travel guides and blogs attempted to clarify the situation, but even their explanations sometimes contributed to the confusion. Some articles were cautious and accurate. Others were sensationalized to attract readers. It was not uncommon to find headlines like "Spain cracks down on sandcastles," accompanied by stock photos of giant, elaborate sand sculptures destined for competitions completely unrelated to the municipal rules being discussed. The irony is that Spain actually hosts numerous sand sculpture festivals and competitions that require significant skill, planning, and artistry. These events are often celebrated, funded, and promoted by local governments. Skilled artists spend days creating enormous, intricate masterpieces. These sculptures draw visitors, boost tourism, and bring attention to coastal areas. They have nothing to do with the small, practical regulations aimed at protecting safety and cleaning pathways. Yet tourists who stumbled across these official sand sculpture events sometimes became even more confused. They'd marvel at enormous professional designs and then ask locals, "I thought sandcastles were illegal." The locals would laugh and explain once again that the myth had overtaken the truth, and the truth was far less dramatic. Of course, myths are not inherently harmful. Sometimes they bring humour, curiosity, and a sense of shared wonder. But this one also highlighted how easily misunderstandings can spread in a world saturated with information. A small rule meant to manage foot traffic or ensure safety became, through a series of exaggerated retellings, a global legend about a nation supposedly cracking down on childhood entertainment. Still, amidst all the comedy, it's worth recognizing the deeper significance underneath. The myth brought attention, albeit in an exaggerated way, to the pressures faced by coastal environments. Beaches are not limitless playgrounds. They are living ecosystems constantly shaped by wind, waves, and human impact. When millions of people visit them each year, even seemingly harmless activities can accumulate into substantial issues. Spain's municipal regulations, far from banning joy, were attempts to acknowledge reality. Where beaches were fragile, they were protected. Where crowds were overwhelming, pathways were cleared. Where dunes were eroding, boundaries were placed. These measures were not designed to eliminate the charm of beach life, but to preserve it. And perhaps this is the quiet truth at the heart of the entire story. People love building sandcastles. They have done so for centuries, long before tourism exploded, long before memes could circle the world in hours. Sandcastles are symbols of creativity, fleeting beauty, and childhood wonder. No one wants them banned. No one wants them forbidden. Not Spain, not the tourists, and certainly not anyone who's ever felt the joy of shaping wet sand into temporary art. That is precisely why the myth became so powerful. It touched something emotional. It felt symbolic, like the defense of innocence against bureaucracy. Even though the story was wrong, its appeal was understandable. And so today, as sunbathers stretch out on Spain's sandy shores, as children run with buckets and spades, as beach patrols stroll calmly without dramatic intervention, the myth continues to drift lightly through conversations, travel blogs, and online jokes. It has become part of the cultural fabric, woven into the tapestry of summertime storytelling. The reality remains what it always was: simple, practical, and far less dramatic than people imagine. But in the dance between reality and myth, the beaches of Spain have embraced both. The truth keeps everyone safe. The myth keeps everyone entertained. And every evening, as the sun dips low and the waves glide forward, the sand smooths itself once again, ready for the next day's stories, misunderstandings, creations, and laughter. Why the myth still lives, and why Spain doesn't mind. There is something strangely beautiful about the way myths refuse to die. They linger in the corners of conversation, resurfacing again and again with the persistence of waves washing the shore. And Spain's supposed ban on sandcastles has now cemented itself among the most enduring modern travel myths. It doesn't matter how many times local officials clarify the situation, or how often travel writers debunk it, or how many tourists witness the reality firsthand. The story keeps resurfacing, like a plastic shovel lost at sea, finally washing back on shore. One might imagine that Spain would be frustrated by this. After all, who wants to be known as the country that forbids children from building sandcastles? It is the kind of myth that seems, on the surface, mildly absurd and potentially embarrassing. But the truth is far more nuanced and far more reflective of Spain's personality. Spaniards, by and large, have found a way to embrace the myth with humour rather than irritation. And perhaps that is why the story continues to live so comfortably alongside reality. To understand why this myth persists so strongly, you have to first understand the way modern tourism intersects with internet storytelling. A simple municipal rule, designed for a specific stretch of coastline, became fuel for global imagination. Digital culture thrives on quirky laws, mismatched translations, and stories that straddle the line between reality and satire. And when tourists encounter something unfamiliar, especially in a foreign country where signs may not always be in their native language, the conditions for myth-making become perfect. A municipal ordinance meant to protect a dune here, or a safety guideline about digging deep holes there, morphs into an international tale of a country banning castles. It's not that people intentionally distort the truth. Most are simply repeating something they heard, adding a bit of flair, filling in gaps, and reshaping the story into something more dramatic, more humorous, or more memorable. The Spanish coasts became laboratories for this strange intersection. On one hand, you have locals who fully understand the practical purpose of the rules. On the other, you have tourists who arrive with preconceived notions shaped by blogs, videos, memes, and anecdotal stories from friends who heard from another friend who once visited Spain and almost got fined for building a moat. These layers of storytelling accumulate until they overshadow the mundane origins entirely. What makes the modern situation even more fascinating is that many travellers today arrive fully expecting the myth to be true. They treat it like a quirky travel challenge, a playful dare, or a strange cultural ritual to be tested. Some approach the Spanish coastline with dramatic anticipation, scanning the horizon, as if expecting sandcastle inspectors to emerge from the lifeguard tower at any moment. Others boldly build their structures in full view of everyone, half hoping something interesting will happen, half nervous that their holiday might take a bizarre bureaucratic turn. The locals, well accustomed to this behaviour, often respond with the calm bemusement of people watching the same play for the 100th time. It has become part of the modern beach experience. The confused tourist, the amused local, the friendly official explaining the real guidelines. All of it blends together into a uniquely Spanish form of summertime theatre. But the myth does not only persist because it is funny. It persists because it subtly reflects the delicate balance that modern beach communities must navigate. Coastal environments are under pressure like never before. Rising sea levels, increased erosion and staggering tourist numbers have forced many regions to adopt protective measures. These measures range from walkway restrictions to dune preservation zones to limits on nighttime beach gatherings. Spain's sandcastle-related rules emerged from this broader context of environmental stewardship, not from any dislike of creativity or fun. Yet when you simplify environmental regulations for a global audience, nuance is often lost. You can explain dune erosion until you're blue in the face, but the sentence, "Spain bans sandcastles," is far more memorable, because it sounds absurd, and absurdity is sticky in the human mind. There is a deeper psychological layer too. People are naturally protective of childhood symbols. A sandcastle isn't simply a mound of sand. It represents innocence, joy, creativity, and the fleeting beauty of moments that vanish with the tide. To imagine a government outlawing such an activity feels wrong on an emotional level. That emotional tension is precisely what gives the myth its longevity. It taps into our instinct to defend small joys against large systems. The irony, of course, is that Spain has not taken away this joy. If anything, Spanish beaches remain some of the most welcoming environments for families seeking exactly those simple pleasures: sun, sea, and the ancient tradition of shaping the earth with your hands. Children run freely with buckets. Parents build elaborate sculptures with their kids. Teenagers dig moats. Adults lounge nearby, watching their creations take shape while sipping cool drinks. And nearby, municipal workers prepare for their evening rounds, ensuring that the beach remains safe and clean for the next day. What has changed, however, is the global conversation around beaches in general. Environmental awareness has grown. Safety has become more important. Tourists now share more responsibility than ever before in preserving the fragile landscapes they enjoy. And, interestingly enough, the sandcastle myth, despite its inaccuracies, has inadvertently sparked widespread discussions about how we treat these natural spaces. People who would not normally think twice about environmental impact find themselves wondering whether sand structures could affect erosion, wildlife or safety. These questions, regardless of how they arise, are part of a broader shift in global attitudes. In this sense, the myth has served an unexpected purpose. It has encouraged people to reflect, if only for a moment, on their role in preserving the places they visit. Modern Spain continues to balance tourism and preservation with care. Many beaches now have clearer signage explaining what is allowed, what is discouraged, and why it matters. These signs highlight dune protection, wildlife nesting zones, safety hazards, and rules for nighttime beach access. The sandcastle myth appears nowhere in official guidelines, but the real concerns behind beach management remain present and important. Tourists still ask questions, and beach patrols still answer with kindness. Some visitors film their sandcastle building sessions as humorous acts of civil disobedience, tagging them with captions like "breaking the law in Spain." Locals respond with laughing emojis, knowing full well that no law is being broken at all. A strange camaraderie has grown around this myth, a shared international inside joke that unites travellers and residents in mutual amusement. It is not uncommon to hear multilingual conversations where people from different countries bond over their disbelief that such a rule could exist. Someone from Germany might say, "I heard you cannot build anything above ankle height." Someone from Canada might reply, "I heard you need a permit for a bucket." A British tourist chimes in with, "I read that moats are strictly prohibited." And all the while, Spanish families nearby are busy building their own castles with complete serenity. This blending of cultural perspectives is part of what makes modern tourism so fascinating. Myths shape expectations, expectations shape behaviour, and behaviour shapes the atmosphere of a place. In the case of the Spanish sandcastle myth, the result is a gentle layer of humour coating the summer air, something that adds charm rather than takes it away. As for enforcement today, it is almost entirely focused on safety and environmental preservation. Deep pits remain a concern, not because they violate any symbolic activity, but because they can collapse suddenly and trap people. Pathways must remain clear for emergency vehicles and clean-up crews. Protected dunes remain off-limits to ensure they survive the pressures of increased foot traffic. None of this is about banning children from enjoying themselves. It is about ensuring that beaches remain safe, accessible, and ecologically sound. Yet even with all these practical measures, the myth continues to float beside the truth like a small, mischievous seagull never quite leaving the shoreline. And perhaps it will continue long into the future. Maybe in 10 years, new travellers will still arrive with exaggerated stories and nervous questions. Maybe by then, the myth will have evolved even further, gaining new layers of absurdity as it is retold again and again. But the beaches will remain the same. the sun will rise. Waves will roll in. Children will laugh as they build their miniature kingdoms. Parents will carve out moats, towers, and walls. And long after the day has ended, the tide will erase everything cleanly, gracefully, preparing the sand for new stories, new myths, and new generations of builders. There is a kind of poetry in that cycle. Sandcastles, after all, are temporary art. They are meant to be enjoyed in the moment and then surrendered to nature. They are reminders that beauty does not need to be permanent to be meaningful. And the myth about banning them, however incorrect, has unexpectedly reinforced that cultural symbolism, making people more aware of their interaction with the coast. So in the end, Spain has achieved something unusual. It has allowed a myth to coexist peacefully with reality, each enhancing the other in its own way. The truth keeps the beaches safe and protected. The myth adds humour and intrigue. Together, they create a uniquely memorable identity for Spain's coastline, one that travellers carry home, retelling the story of the banned sandcastles with wide smiles long after their footprints have faded from the shore. And when the next curious visitor arrives, bucket in hand, ready to shape the sand into something magical, Spain welcomes them with open arms, warm sun, and the gentle whisper of waves, inviting them to discover not just the truth, but also the joy that lies beneath it.